Hi everyone, this is Navika Chada, Cloud Engineer and a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in Azure. Welcome to yet another episode of Tech Chat with Navika, and I am so glad to share that today marks the 30th episode of Tech Chat with Navika. We've completed 30 episodes so far, and I'm sure many more to go. So, a big thank you to all who have been a part of this journey. And today we are back again with another informative and educative episode where we will dive into the Azure NetApp files. And for that, we have Anthony with us today, who is making his appearance the second time on this podcast. So thank you for that. Anthony is a renowned cloud solution architect at NetApp and Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in Azure. With over 25 years of experience in the IT industry, his expertise spans over infrastructure architecture, cloud solutions, and technical pre-sales with a focus on empowering businesses to harness the power of cloud computing. Anthony has worked with various industries and sectors, guiding them on their cloud journey and unlocking new possibilities. He's extremely passionate about empowering peers with Azure knowledge. And what makes this episode more special is that we are going to be having real-time seamless Indian Sign Language interpretation. And for that, we have Saurabh with us today. Thank you, Saurabh, for joining in. And thank you, Anthony. Over to you if you would like to add up to your introduction.
Thank you, Navika, and thanks for having me back. As you said, this is my second time. So, yeah, it's a very kind introduction you did for myself. Yeah, I mean, I've been around a little while. As you mentioned, I've been in the industry now for over 25 years. For probably almost now half of that, I've been working with Azure. I started in 2012 and then really full-time since 2014 and through various roles. And as you said, now I'm on the pre-sales side of the fence. So let's say we talk a good game in pre-sales. We're not necessarily the guys and girls that are delivering it. So, I'm very involved in assisting customers, understanding how they can leverage the storage, which is obviously one of my main focuses, to the benefits of their solutions. So thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. It's all my pleasure, and I cannot wait to dive into the podcast today. So, as I said, the topic is Azure NetApp Files, and actually, we've already done a podcast on this topic, months back. But for those who actually missed our previous podcast, I think it'll be a good note to start this podcast on. If you can just give an overview of what is Azure NetApp Files, and if you can sort of help us that how does it help us understand as to how does it differentiates from Azure file storage.
Sure. So Azure NetApp Files is essentially a Microsoft first-party Azure native file storage solution, which I think that is the key thing to understand. So I work for a company called NetApp, and NetApp is a intelligent data infrastructure company which has been in business now for over 3 decades, and specializing in this. And NetApp has a storage operating system called ONTAP. Essentially, it is the world's leader in network attached storage in that sense. And Azure NetApp Files has been around now for almost 7 years in general availability in the Azure platform. So it's a very established platform within Azure itself. And Microsoft chose it to address the challenge where customers were requiring to move workloads that were based within the data center that required high performance, low latency from their file storage. And at the time, there wasn't anything there to address this. So Microsoft partnered with NetApp and produced the Azure service, which is now Azure NetApp Files.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Anthony. And now that we have understood the basics of it, let's see it in action at scale. So if you would like to share any real-world use case of Azure NetApp Files and where could it be used?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll reference a customer scenario which they have seen great success by migrating from one storage offering to ANF. This particular customer had challenges with the storage platform that they were using, but that was historical. they actually migrated to Azure before Azure NetApp Files was available. So they had a requirement and they had another storage solution which they utilized to good effect for a long time to meet those requirements. However, as they grew and their business grew and the demands grew, there were challenges around, performance, operational challenges, and also cost, because we're talking about public cloud, right? And cost is everything to businesses, especially in this day and age. So they needed to address that. They needed to find something else. They looked at Azure NetApp Files, did some quite strenuous proof of concept testing to understand how they could integrate that into their platform. The proof of concept was extremely successful. They estimated they were going to save a substantial amount of money during the move. But what was interesting, this customer has now been live on Azure NetApp Files for a couple of years now. And they run this particular solution in its own landing zone. So it's based in a single subscription. So for them to actually measure the financial impact was quite easy, because they could simply look at the cost of the subscription. And in 1 year, they managed to save a 7-digit number, which is quite impressive. Because one of the things people assume, or they see the price of Azure NetApp Files, price per gigabyte, and it seems expensive. And I grant you that. If you look at it, price per gigabyte, it can seem to be expensive. But I think what's really important to remember is this is a platform service. So it's storage as a service. We use the term volume as a service. You don't need to monitor, manage, and maintain this. Microsoft do that for you. You simply consume it. So the actual wider TCO, it really does start to stack up, where you can consume storage on demand as you need it. You can scale it up. You can scale it down. You can turn it off if you wish. So that was on the cost side of things. But on the operational side of things, they had these batch processes which they needed to run a certain time overnight, for instance. And sometimes those batch processes could stray into the working day. And that could cause operational efficiency or problems, because the staff accessing the systems had to wait until those processes were finished. They moved on to Azure NetApp Files, and they reduced the batch processing time by 40%, which actually meant that overnight these batch processes would complete in good time. It would give them what they call white space to do any maintenance work or address any issues, to make sure essentially the systems were back online and then available. And there are the operational efficiencies as well. The teams, they were DBAs and developers, and they hated the fact they had to originally manage storage. And because, as I said, Azure NetApp Files is platform as a service, and it's also integrated into Azure, into the Azure Resource Management plane. So you can control it programmatically using REST API tool sets such as Azure Bicep and Terraform. So they can roll all of their configuration into their pipelines, things like handling snapshots in backup, everything else, all automated. So actually reduce the operational overheads as well. So yeah, three key areas really: performance, operational, and cost optimization.
Thanks for that, Anthony. And thank you for making us understand as to where it fits in terms of these 3 different key areas. Now let's sort of get into examining how the performance tuning has evolved. As I mentioned earlier, we have already done a similar podcast earlier, and I think it's been a year or so now, and I'm sure there have been multiple feature releases and updates in the area of Azure NetApp Files, and one of those being flexible service levels. So would you like to walk us through one of, I would say, last year's most impactful feature of releases, that is flexible service levels, and just help us understand about it?
Sure. So you mentioned flexible service level, and actually, I think recently that is probably going to have the most impact for customers in a positive light regarding expenditure and cost. But as I said, ANF has been around, in GA for almost 7 years. And in that time, Microsoft have, brought a lot of features and enhancements to the service. I think probably another one of the most impactful features, which was released about 18 months ago, again focusing on the cost, was the cool access tiering. Tiering enables customers to essentially tier data off of the ANF volume into cool access, which is blob storage account underneath. But it's all included as part of the service. It's all configured as part of the service. Customers don't have to create any additional resources. They simply configure it. And it's based on life cycle. And you can set the life cycle from 2 to 183 days. And ultimately, once data reaches that age, the blocks of data are tiered to cool access. This is block level, so it's extremely efficient. And it can massively contribute to help customers save money. And I have one customer I know their costs are being dropped by almost 45%, so substantial saving. But the great thing about it is you still maintain all the enterprise grade data management capability of Azure NetApp Files, the snapshotting, cloning, backup, and replication, just at a much cheaper price point. And the flexible service level that was introduced, I think it actually went GA last week. So it's now generally available. Azure NetApp Files originally had 3 service levels: standard, premium, and ultra. And your performance went up as you went up from standard to premium and ultra, right up to ultra with 128 megabytes of throughput per terabyte. The great thing about the flexible service level is, as the name alludes to, much more flexible. Essentially, it breaks it out into a capacity metric and a throughput metric. So you can size volumes or capacity pools to focus on performance or capacity. So an example would be, if you create a capacity pool for Azure NetApp Files of 1 terabyte in size, you automatically get 128 mega throughput for that 1 terabyte. So essentially, Microsoft are giving you free throughput. If you think about it, to do that in the with the original service levels, that would be an ultra capacity pool. But what you can do for that volume, and this is where Microsoft and NetApp have listened to customers and their requirements, is customers might not necessarily need a huge amount of capacity, but they might need more throughput. So as an example, for that 1 terabyte capacity pool, you can 5 times the throughput performance of that 1 terabyte capacity pool, which starts at 128, but you can take that all the way up to 640 mega throughput using only 1 terabyte of capacity. And on the flip side, customers that don't necessarily need a large amount of throughput, but have a large capacity requirement, they can flex that volume or capacity pool to be 100 terabytes, but leave the base at 128 mega throughput. So ultimately, it's making it much, much more cost effective and flexible, so the customers can size for what they actually need to consume. Another product team modeled this with some existing customers, and the savings range between 10 to 40%. So it can introduce considerable savings. It does depend. It does depend on the workload and the requirements of the workload. But majority of the customers, I think nearly all the customers that I've been speaking to who are looking to move to flexible service level will realize a saving. So I think as regarded impact, I think the cool access tiering, again, which is helping customers save money, and flexible service level, which is, again, helping customers to save money. And that all adds up to what we use the term as effective pricing, because with ANF, it's built on ONTAP. And one of NetApp's USPs has always been the snapshotting capability, which are extremely lightweight and efficient and fast to capture and recover from. And that can massively add value to customers. If you think about things like data corruption, data deletion, and in this day and age, God forbid, ransomware, with all the cyber attacks that are happening globally currently, these snapshots can be, a great way to safeguard against those, to have that point-in-time copy, which is instantly available to recover from. But those snapshots are very efficient, and if you think about it, if you've got a 1 terabyte volume, if you capture a daily snapshot for 30 days, with some storage, you could have, say, 30 terabytes of storage you're consuming with those snapshots. But because Azure NetApp Files has the efficiencies based on ONTAP, for those snapshots to be extremely lightweight. And I will put the caveat in, it does depend on the type of data and the amount of data churn that can happen. But ultimately, those snapshots could be 5, 10, maybe 15% overhead. So actually, if you think about it, where you should theoretically be consuming, say, 30 terabytes, you might only be consuming 10 or 15. So actually, the effective price is driven down because of that. So yeah, I think impact-wise, on the pricing side, then definitely the cool access implementation and the introduction of flexible service level.
Thanks for that, Anthony. And as we're actually talking about, the major changes that have actually updates that have come up, one of those has also been, apart from the one that we discussed, has been the migration assistant. And I think it's recently, now it has recently become generally available. So if we move from like runtime tuning to migrations, what do you think with Azure NetApp Files? Migration assistant now generally available, how has it actually streamlined the large scale data migrations and how it has impacted all now?
So the ANF migration assistant is a tool that NetApp customers that are running on premises within the data center can leverage to migrate data into Azure NetApp Files. So this is based on NetApp SnapMirror technology, which again is extremely efficient. It runs at block level. And I can actually give you a real world example because I've recently, for the last year, been involved with a customer, a very large customer, which had, I think, around about 600 terabytes of data they needed to move out of the data center. And they had a time-bound exit for that data center because it was contractual and that contract was coming to an end. So they needed to exit within a specific timeline. And the Azure NetApp Files Migration Assistant didn't actually exist when it wasn't a product which was available in any guise when they started their migration. And they have data centers all around the globe. And the first migration they were working on was in Asia. The Asia migration, so the Asia install was one of the smallest. I think it was around about 30 terabytes, which is not that much data. And the only way they could move that data, maintain permissions, ACLs, etc., was to use the good old-fashioned, tried and tested method of robocopy. And they actually, these guys, they were great to work with. Great team of people there, very knowledgeable, very capable. They knew the technologies very well. And they benchmarked and they measured that migration time. And that migration time took approximately 1 month to migrate data from the data center into Azure using robocopy across, file copy across the network. And then during that time, just after that migration completed, the migration assistant became available to preview. Now we would always, insist that customers that want to be involved in preview features wouldn't use them for production. By all means, use them for testing and to get their knowledge up to speed with that feature. Also, some customers are asked to give feedback on features, capabilities, good, bad, indifferent, and some customers have actually been involved and they've molded services and features to be better for the end user, the end customer. Anyway, so they looked at the ANF migration assistant, spoke to our product team and decided that, because it was a migration, relatively sort of low risk really, but there was a time they were running out of time. They opted to use it. And they did, they're great guys. They worked with engineering and the teams and with a bit of our support to configure the sync relationships, and then migrated the remainder of their data centers, which were based in Europe, which were much, much larger data set, almost over 10 times larger than the Asia data set. And I know one of the volumes which took the longest was approximately 60 terabytes. And using the ANF migration assistant, that migrated in less than a week. So, a considerable improvement. And the ANF migration assistant, again, it's based on NetApp SnapMirror. It's block level, much, much more efficient, and can really help speed the time to migrate. And the great thing about this customer is also with the ANF migration assistant, this is for NetApp customers, so customers that are running ONTAP on premises. This customer had 6 years worth of snapshots in their volumes, and they maintained all the snap history as well, which for them was great because they had all that history of the snapshots going back 6 years that they could call upon, and that was important for the business because their business had a requirement to maintain that. So it made their lives a lot easier, is what it comes down to, and they managed to meet their data center exit time.
Thank you for that explanation, Anthony. I now, we have spoken about specific details about Azure NetApp Files, but if we sort of expand our scope to Azure's broader ecosystem, would you like to throw some light as to how can we sort of integrate Azure NetApp Files with other Azure services? Maybe not going that much into detail, but a high level overview of it, and what are the services that can be integrated with Azure NetApp Files.
Yeah, sure. I think especially in this day and age, the age of artificial intelligence, this is the world we are now in and we will live in. So, but artificial intelligence relies on the data, okay, and the data lives on the storage. So the data is important, ergo making the storage important, and having access to that data. That is really the challenge. And the term data has gravity. Yeah, so data draws applications to it. The data is very, very heavy. So to move data to get it closer to the AI is challenging and it's not ideal. So the best scenario is to bring the AI to the data, okay, to allow the solutions to have access to the data. NetApp recently announced, or Microsoft actually recently announced, NetApp has a connector for Microsoft 365 called Neo. So Neo is a customized connector which NetApp has built for customers that are running on NetApp storage, be that Azure NetApp Files, Cloud Volumes ONTAP, which is a marketplace third-party IaaS-based solution that NetApp has within Azure, or indeed NetApp on premises, to access that data, and with very low overhead to the end user. So the end user can then query the data hosting on NetApp via Copilot, and that is extremely powerful because I think it was Jensen Huang that stood on stage at the NVIDIA conference, and I think statistic was something like 42% of the world's file data lives on NetApp storage. There's a lot of intelligence there which can be exposed via this Microsoft 365 Copilot connector to allow end users to really start to benefit and be much more efficient with working, to be able to query data to build things like management summaries or reports, or if you're thinking with legal firms with large case studies, or insurance firms with insurance claims, and that all the data that's there in documents, which someone would probably need to read through and gain intelligence from, to simply query them with Copilot and ask the questions from Copilot of what they need to achieve and build. That's extremely powerful. So I think that is one sense, and also Azure NetApp Files will have a REST API access to the data as well, which is then going to integrate into Azure Fabric and expose it to services like Databricks, AI Studio, etc. So again, allowing applications to access the data in situ without having to move that data around. I think that is going to be interesting to see how that develops over time. And if you think about the personas in the AI world of a buyer or a builder, where somebody wants to buy something off the shelf and use it without actually developing it, that is where the M365 Copilot connector is going to sit. The REST API stuff, that's more the Gen AI thing. That's the builder, a customer that wants to build their own bespoke AI solution using the various services that are available within Azure itself. So there's two options. So I think those moving forward, that's really where we're going to see customers realize value from the artificial intelligence side.
That was really informative, and I think it's sort of Azure NetApp Files sort of caters to multiple integrations with different Azure services. Finally, as we sort of wrap up the podcast, we have done a brief of what Azure NetApp Files is. We have gone into the specifics of it. We've also covered the recent updates that have taken place. Now that we are ending the podcast, the last question that I would like to take is that how do you think that Azure NetApp Files is contributing to operational efficiency goals, more in terms of performance in general?
I think it's the biggest contribution it's making is in its simplicity and flexibility. Azure NetApp Files are a very simplistic service to work with. And the flexibility of it, the fact that you can scale it up, you can scale it down, you can turn it off, there's ultimate flexibility there. And we're talking about a cloud computing platform, and customers, we've discussed cost a lot, but that they are more focused now on sustainability. I know many customers are aiming for things like carbon neutral, carbon negative, and to be able to offload that into the data centers which Microsoft are operating and running, which are very focused on being carbon neutral or negative. That is a huge, I think a huge step forward in sustainability. And also, like I said, being able to flex the storage and use it as you need it to deliver the performance that you need when you need it. As I said, you can scale it up, you can scale it down, you can optimize for performance. And the natural byproduct of performance optimization is cost optimization. And also with the cost optimization, performance optimization, you get those operational efficiencies of power drain and all that. You're actually using services when you need them and configuring them to perform when you need that performance. Whereas historically in the data centers, things get switched on and they probably get thought about for 6 months or a year, and then they get forgotten about, and they're left, they're still burning power, right? They're still there operating, and as they always did. But I think the sustainability thing, obviously that's a lot of Microsoft, right? Because they're delivering the platform for you, and they have done a huge amount towards sustainability and green energy for these data centers. Whereas the traditional customer running in their data center probably hasn't or couldn't, because for whatever reasons. So for the sustainability, just offloading into Azure immediately, you are most likely supporting and assisting with sustainability, but also just being efficient in the running of your solutions. Like I said, by making them perform as you need them, flexing them up and down to meet performance, will have an impact on your cost, and it will also have an impact on sustainability.
Like, absolutely. I think this is really informative for people, that as to how efficiently are you using the resources in general. I'm talking about it typically depends on you. That we have come to the end of the podcast, and as usual, Anthony, it's always a pleasure having you on the podcast. It's always so informative and educative podcast whenever you're in. So thank you for that. And would you like to give any ending note before we actually end the podcast?
Well, thank you again for having me back. I must have done something right the first time. So it's a pleasure. It's great to help support other members of the MVP community. You do a great job, Navika, with your contributions and the support that you give. So thank you. I've really enjoyed it, and hopefully you might have me back again.
Thank you so much. Of course, always more than happy to have you on. And let's do one more podcast super soon then. And and also since this podcast includes Indian Sign Language interpretation, the whole idea is to make it accessible to as many people as possible. And Saurav, thank you for joining in today and doing this seamless interpretation. So thank you for that. Great, thank you so much. And for the people who want to learn more about Azure NetApp Files, I would really recommend you to also head over to Microsoft Learn. And you have plethora of modules and documentations on Azure NetApp Files, which will help you understand it more better in case you're interested in it. So thank you.